integrating ChatGPT into a search engine is such an incredible tool for the user of the search engine.
Potentially, anyway, we have to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, the potential is crazy. Yeah. But on the flip side, I don't understand how it's good for anybody else.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 402 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the webs programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is February 10th. 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be just a bucket of curse words.
Avalanche of swears.
Yeah, just a lot. I still got to give people an opportunity to turn. People do that, right? They hear, oh my gosh, there's curse words, and then they turn it off.
I imagine a panicked fumbling of the volume controls and smacking the next button, that sort of thing. Yeah,
they cover their fragile ears.
Whenever I listen to This American Life, they always go, warning. Just every episode, they're like, warning. This is an unbeeped version of the show. If you prefer to listen to a beeped version, you can find it and then they give a URL, And I'm like, has any person in the history of the universe been like, oh no, and then they turn off. They turn off and then they go search for the
That's the thing is
other
they
episode?
actually do. There's a subset of people who do that.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
Anyways, so, we're going to have unbeeped curse words in this episode. So if you want to get the beeped version, there isn't one.
Just
deal with it.
You'll just have to carry your own beeper. And then when it seems like we're about to say something, just hit it.
Which is much of the time. Also, we'd like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, so there's lots of stuff to talk about and only so much time. So first off, Sam, you got some kind of a home story.
So,
let's go.
Yes. So as I divulged my secrets in the past episode that my wife is near to popping this baby out, which means that we have my mother-in-law, Wendy, living with us, helping out around the house, mainly doing cooking, taking care of some stuff since Diana at this point has 2 wrist braces on, because of some carpal tunnel that developed during pregnancy from just so much fluid in the body, and now has a knee brace on as of today. So she's sort of she's becoming just immobilized over time, right? So Wendy's here helping out. She's doing great. It's been very fun. And on Monday, we were prepping for playtests this week, which we'll talk about later, the facts of those. But on Monday, I worked a little late. So I worked until about 7 o'clock or so. And I hang up the final call, which was sort of the final stuff of every last thing we need to tune up for tomorrow such that we can hit this playtest really well. And as soon as I hit the end button on the call, a extremely loud, piercing alarm starts going off in the house that just says, intruder, exit immediately. And then it just keeps on doing that. And I'm talking like ear-splitting, mind-shattering loudness, okay? Now here's the thing. Never heard this before in my life. We've been in this house for coming on 2 years.
That's quite the alarm system.
Quite the alarm.
Did you inherit your alarm system or did you?
So here it is. So when we bought the house, we got the alarm system with the house, but it was supposed to be, it's not like we're not paying for any service. It's just sort of in there, right?
It was just there, yeah.
It's just there, and it's been on the wall, just sitting there, and it sort of every so often flashes. It's like, hey, I'm not connected to anything, sort of thing. But, I've never touched it. Diana's never touched it. Never really worried about it. So I come out and I'm like, what's going on? And Diana and her mom are sitting there. And Diana's looking at her mom real cross. And she's like, I knew it. She's like, I came over today around lunch. Wendy was snacking near the pantry, which is where the alarm is. So, Wendy was sitting there snacking. And she was like, what does this do? It just pushed some of the buttons on the alarm system, which apparently armed it. Okay.
Oh, no.
Such that what happened around 7 p.m. was that Diana opened the door to let Yogi out. Suddenly, shit explodes, right? And what proceeded then is that the alarm is just going off for like 15 minutes because it goes off at like a 15-minute stretch once it goes off, right? Very loud. Meanwhile, I just grab my headphones. Diana grabs her phone, and we're just Googling, like, how do you disable this alarm? And all of the stuff requires believe it or not, having the access code, which we don't have because it's not our alarm system. And we never even bothered asking about it because we thought it was not like functional, right? We thought it was there, but not like on. So Wendy, of course, is like kind of skulking around trying to do some research too, but clearly feeling very bad about this because it's like just an avalanche of sound in the house, right? And so finally, after about 40 minutes of Googling, we're trying to.
This thing's going off the whole time?
Well, it's going off for about 15 minutes of a stretch, and then there'll be a pause, and then Dinah was trying some stuff, and typically we'd fire it back off again, right? Because it still says basically the alarm is still going, technically, right? Even if it's not blaring the loudness. And so like, oh shit. So we just keep on Googling. And then finally I'm like, okay, I think we need to go into the next stage mode, which is to quit trying to do it from the panel and like trying to figure out what the code is. Yeah, we're now in like straight up heist movie territory. Where's the box? Where's the
power
box?
source?
Yeah.
I thought you just shoot it. Don't you just shoot it?
I think you just shoot it.
You just shoot it. But so basically what I found out is I did a bunch of, I was going down this rabbit hole really fast. I found this video and it was hilarious because all of the comments in the video, it's like the one video where the guy's like, so you shouldn't really have to ever do this. But if you bought a house, you don't know the alarm code and then it goes off sometime, or sometimes they just like go off randomly. And you can't get it to turn off. Here's how you like disable the whole thing. And so I follow the video and I run into the basement, find the box, which is like, hidden in one of the fucking closets down there. And then luckily, and this is the last piece where I was like, please God, because there's a key always. It's like a locked box that's mounted on the wall in which all the electrical stuff is for these things, right? Including a backup battery. And so I was like, as I was trying to find this thing, I was like, please God, when I find this, I don't believe God, but whatever, deities. Please, deities.
Someone.
Please, something. When I find this box, like, please let there be a damn key. Just let it be resting in the ignition. You know what I mean? Because if this is not in there, I'm gonna have to like hammer open something to deal with this. I already flipped off all the circuit breakers. None of them control this thing, right? And it's got a backup battery, so it doesn't matter. So luckily I popped this final door open, see the box there, keys in the ignition. I'm like, yes. Crank the thing open, rip it open, and then you have to like basically pull these wires out of like a big. It's essentially like an exposed circuit board.
That's
hooked
your
up to an
hot wire in
battery.
your car.
Yeah, I felt like I was doing a heist all of a sudden. So I was like, pop, and I pull one of them off, and the alarm goes off again. And I'm like, this is now cool as shit because I'm like actively involved, and it feels like a heist. And then I'm like, oh no! It's a frantically trying to get one of the other wires off. Finally, get that one off, and the whole thing dies. And I was like, I'm at peace, and I feel like I've completed a heist.
After like 45 minutes of
it was an hour and a half. It was an hour and a half of trying to figure stuff out and doing all this stuff, and then occasionally testing it by opening the door, setting the alarm off again. And it was just this hilarious, ridiculous scene, such that it carried me from a long day of work immediately into literally, an alarm system heist that lasted up until basically it was time to shower and go to bed. And it was so ridiculous. Yeah.
I mean, that's a productive evening in the sense that, you had something to do and you got it done.
I felt very focused. Yeah. And also I learned a lot. I learned a lot about home alarm systems. So if you need someone to come in and, do a heist on your own house, you let me know. Or just YouTube that video where the guys.
That'll probably be faster, I bet.
The funniest thing is in the comments of that video is basically everyone in the same situation as I am, where they're like, yeah, we've been in this house for like 2 years, so the alarm went off. 6 hours later, we can't figure out how to get the thing shut down. So it's a good time.
Yeah, in the age of working from home, I imagine home invasions are much more fraught than they used to be
For everybody involved.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
So I assume those numbers have gone down slightly.
Yes.
Maybe a horrible piercing alarm system isn't quite as necessary as it once was.
Honestly, though, it was so loud and once it finished its first wave, Di and I were talking about it. We're like, honestly, yeah, like if I broke into a house and this thing was going off, I would get the fuck out. Yeah, so loud.
Because like the neighbors are going to come.
Yeah.
That's why I was
so
loud.
I was like, I thought someone was going to call 911 like on our behalf at some point because this thing is so loud. I'm sure it was just echoing through the neighborhood. Like,
oh yeah,
just insane.
It's way worse than a car alarm going off.
Oh, it's a whole other level.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got out of it. Did you did everybody put on some kind of noise canceling headphones or something to try to?
Diana's like unbothered by noise somehow, so she was just chilling after like a minute. Yogi wasn't even. The dog was just. I don't understand why he wasn't freaking out. He was just vibing. I was like,
he's like, now everybody gets to feel what I feel all the time. constant.
I put up my headphones basically immediately because I was like, if I'm going to have to deal with this for an hour, this is not going to be.
Yeah, I would have had earplugs in instantly.
Just right away. Oh man. Well, I'm glad you lived through
Yep.
that. You know,
Harrowing adventure.
Yeah, it was quite the time, and I forgave Wendy. I think Wendy finally forgave herself after a day or so.
that's the real.
That's the real
the
one.
key.
Yeah, it was very fun.
Now, when you're trying to unlock this box, were you kind of secretly hoping that you couldn't get it open so that you could bash it open? With
That
like
is
a
kind of
hammer?
one of those because I was like, because I didn't even know this box was down here, so I don't really care about it. You know what I mean? Like it's
screw that
already
box.
destroyed in my mind. Yeah, so
It
in
never
some
even
ways-
existed.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, it's like it just adds another level of epicness to this already ridiculous story. It's like the AJR song, like 100 bad days make 100 good stories. You know, you're like, that's one of those. It could have been worse,
Did it?
and it would have been even more incredible. I don't know.
I thought that I got you a lockpick kit.
I do have one, but
got
I'm
you
not
one, right?
good at it.
Well, I need to have to find it because once he moved, I'm sure it wasn't a high priority to like figure out where to put this.
Man,
It's
I
in the-
played around with that lockpick kit for so long, and then I was like, and I got all the locks open in the kit, and I was like, fuck yeah! And then I was like, time to lockpick my own house. But it turns out that the locks in the lockpick kit were kind of beginner locks meant to make build up your confidence because house locks, car locks, all that stuff. They got all kinds of janky things going on in there that
car
I don't know if you guys have seen.
too. House locks often are just as easy as the kits.
Yeah, something mine wasn't.
Yeah,
that's
good.
for sure. I don't know if you guys have seen the lock picking lawyer videos on
they're
YouTube,
great.
but I love that guy. He can get into anything in like 8 seconds. That's so good.
It is always
and-
spooky if you've got locked out of your house and someone comes to unlock it and they're really good because they just kneel down, sort of like kiss the door, and then it opens, and you're like, "How are you allowed to be free?" You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
but
this
can you
feels
imagine-
illegal?
Can you imagine what the world must look like to a locksmith? Like
Just if it's an open world video game, you could go in there and smash all the Zelda pots.
like
and
they
do all the
know,
details, you know what I mean?
yeah, they know that they can just go anywhere that they want.
It's like having a level 100 lockpicking in Fallout.
Yep.
You know, where you're just like, I don't care about locked doors. That's not
Closed
even a
doors.
concept.
It's not a concept that I adhere to. It's a social construct.
That's kind of a beautiful, maybe a gift to give yourself in some ways, right? That sort of
lockpicking.
yeah, just that sense
freedom
of
to
just
go
being
anywhere.
able- yeah, you can't contain me.
It is. I mean, it is pretty fun. Like the first time you open a lock, it just like it pops. You're like, ooh. It's just such a satisfying.
Now try doing it with an alarm going, man.
Experience.
Whew, it gets you going. Tell you what, Heist.
Yeah, that's like level 5. I'm not even close to that. All right, let's talk about some studio stuff, namely Crashland's 2 playthroughs.
yeah.
So it's so this week we decided, well, I guess last week we decided, all right, we're wrapping up our current kind of set of milestones. It's time to do another playthrough and see if the things that we did the things that we thought they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we had talked a little while back about the idea of doing a lot of iterative work on the first few hours of gameplay, because if you have something super cool that happens in hour 10 but nothing really that cool or interesting happens before that, nobody's gonna see that cool thing. So there's just no point working on expanding all the future stuff in the game if the initial set of things is not good, right? So the other kind of challenge you have is it's all about pacing and onboarding, where if you have a game that's fairly open, fairly complex, has lots of like different interesting nuances and mechanics and stuff, you can't just hit the player with all of them at once. Because people are like a CPU where like they can take in one thing at a time, and process it. And then once they're done processing that, they can get the next thing. And if you give them 2 things at once, the second thing just kind of doesn't exist. Like their brain just deletes it from their attention. So the other thing that we're kind of fighting against is something we've learned is that if you give somebody only one thing to do, they don't like that because they're on rails and they feel like they're being constrained. And that's when people complain about things being grindy or boring or whatever, right?
Yeah. So you may hear then, if you're listening to those 2 statements, a bit of a challenge, right? Because you need to give people
they don't match.
Yeah, give them a thing to do so that they don't get confused, lost, or use the wrong tool to solve the problem in the game and then be mad about it. But you also need to give them more than one thing to do so that
they feel like they are deciding what to
or
do.
you give them
really
the
they're
feeling,
not.
the feeling of having more than one thing to do, even if they don't actually.
Yeah. So we've made tons and tons of changes to the game since our prior playthroughs in terms of pacing and how we're teaching things. We've added lots of new features and ways for us to kind of highlight things early on to, better instruct and all that stuff. And so what do you think, Sam? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so much of this work so far has been what I would call it's basically foundational insurance work to make it possible for us to confidently build the rest of the game in two ways. One is the way you were talking about, which is, if you lose 80% of your users in the first 30 minutes, then why the fuck are you building another 60 hours of content for 2 years, right? Doesn't make any sense. But the other is actually even more foundational on the game design side, which is that Crashlands 2 has enough differences from the original that it's been a big challenge wrapping up how all of the systems actually integrate. They all kind of interleave in a really interesting and complicated sort of a way that's taken a while to be able to figure out how that actually works well, how to balance that combination of systems out from a play experience perspective, such that the player ends up having a better time than they would in the original, and certainly doesn't get both either confused, overwhelmed, or bored, right? And so most of the changes then on this pacing stuff were oriented around that, not introducing stuff too soon, but also not too late. And stuff can be apparently in this game 8 different systems talking to each other, and so it was a lot to try to figure out how to do. And so what's nice about it, we had 2 of our mods from our community who basically did the playtest for us. And what's interesting about it is that we didn't see any of the problems we saw the first 2 tests, which is always a good sign, right? As far as progress.
We took care of those. So
took care of all those. But then more importantly, it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch a game that works. And what I mean by that is where, players are going to experience moments where they don't quite get what's going on, but they'll try something. Or they'll sort of be building a mental model of how stuff works, and then you violate it a little bit and see some surprise that they have. And it's very, very fun as a designer, especially the one who worked on it, to see that stuff kind of actually rendering out in a way where it is working. So my takeaway from it is that the massive amount of design change between this and the first game is now, I would say, kind of fully up and running, in the sense that I think we managed to crack the nut on how to do all that interleaving of systems, including just the bare bones of the newness of all these systems put together, but in a way that still retains that Crashlandsy goodness. And is, I think, it's a bit more not just RPG in terms of the characters are just better. I mean, Jenny has done a great job with the writing and stuff, and the characters are actually, interesting. You hang out with them for much longer, and so you care about them,
There's a lot more personality and story
in
this, I would say.
Yeah. And then a lot of the storytelling beats they're much more reactive and stuff. And so there's a lot more of that laced throughout what is otherwise then a also more complex open world sort of crafting mechanic that we got in there with how everything works for progression. And so, I think I'm very happy with how it worked out. It was very odd though, because immediately after playtest, I just was exhausted and went to bed. It's maybe it was the alarm the night before. I don't know, but
Could be.
I was just completely wiped out, and I woke up in the morning and I'd even talked to my wife about it a little bit the night before, but the sense I had was one of relief, right? Which is that, anybody who's listened to the podcast now for the, 100 episodes or so that have been Crashlands 2 oriented, knows that we've been really swinging for the fences on it in terms of not just design changes and the ambition of the game scale and stuff like that, but also the tools and tech needed to make it all happen that are buttressing those design changes and stuff. And so in other words, a lot of the decisions that we made early on that, you could have just made Crashlands again, right? But we didn't. But then the fact that we didn't means that there's cost and risk associated with having not just done the same thing again. And, honestly, this whole time it has been a bit scary for me every so often being did we bark up the wrong tree? Do we have the actual skills to back this up? Are we just going to end up building tools until, a few years go by, we're out of money and then we just have to
capitalize on them?
Yeah. I have had that fear for sure, because the amount of the changes have been just a lot. And so, and keep in mind, we're still doing this a very, very small team, very small. And so, I think I woke up on Thursday and was I think that's it. I think we not and this is it, but this is it. We did it. there it is. We fucking landed next to the thing that we've been trying to land next to for 2 damn years after all this ridiculous infrastructure work, restructuring how the studio works, hiring people, adding people to the team. We managed to scale up on the programming side, managed to scale up on the actual content team side. Got build machines running in the cloud to handle all this. I don't know. Just the whole thing's insane. And then finally it's like landing the Mars rover sort of a vibe for me, which is like, okay, it landed. You know what I mean? It's on the surface of the planet now. And now we got the rest of the work to do. But
now we have to build a new spaceship on Mars and then shoot that off and take it to, I don't know where we want it to go, but
yeah. Somewhere.
Yeah. Now
Titan,
that it's,
I don't know.
to me, it's the now we get to draw the rest of the owl, right?
Yep.
Which is like, we framed it out. It has the right shape based on what we wanted to achieve. And it's just final systems dev to like layer in some of the more interesting game systems that'll come kind of over time. Like we still don't have pets.
No, pets,
but it's like
farming.
It's like pets are a thing that'll that kind of opens up after the initial batch of stuff that the player's going to do, because if we're introducing how to play the game and all the different concepts and characters and whatever, then like I was saying earlier, CPU brain, right? We can't be like also pets, also fishing, also farming, also blah, 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 right? So we'll be starting to work those in over the course of this first section of the game, but this wasn't really the time to do that, right? But all the tools are there to allow for us to layer those systems in far more easily than in the past.
Yeah, so I think, and it's always weird. It is always weird watching, depending on the kind of game you're making, the immediate player response while playing it will be very different, right? So if you're making like a competitive game or something that's more just really action heavy, right, or has those like big epic moments that are happening kind of repeatedly. Then you will occasionally get, like, actually during playtests, you might get people who are actually, God, or like sort of exclaiming.
Big reactions.
Big reactions. But if you've ever watched someone who's streaming like a Stardew Valley or whatever else, it's a very different thing. People are
pretty just contemplative and just kind of chill. They're having a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's also one of those things where you have to know, we always want to keep in mind the reaction that you're getting from people emotionally and sort of including the genre set that you're in to make sure you're not like, how come people aren't screaming for joy or like, swearing a ton or whatever else. And it's like, it's not Super Meat Boy. It's not League of Legends. It's like a open world. It's kind of a chill open world RPG crafting game. Like,
Yeah. And I'd say, for the most part, throughout these playthroughs, we got the reactions that I was hoping for in a lot of the places, it's like, but it's the things like, oh, like that kind of thing, or like a chuckle when something funny happens, where it's like, okay, like
that's where
things are, people are like having those like aha moments and they're figuring things out and they're seeing funny things.
I think it's otherwise it's actually the absence of negative emotional states, right? Because like
that's a big one
for a game that's meant to be more sort of chill and like in this kind of vibe, right? Where the positive experiences are just like these like discoveries here and there, but things that mostly just stay internal. If someone starts getting bored, right, like visibly bored or frustrated or whatever, like that's actually then the signal that you are looking for, right? Because you actually, as you're saying, you can't expect things over like baseline contentedness, because the game's intention is to sort of put you into this content state.
Yeah, we don't want to put you into a high stress, like hyper excitable kind of a mode. It's Crashlands, you should be kind of like having wholesome moments. You should be having a good time. You should be contemplating and being pretty chill and zen.
And then having exciting moments here and there.
Yeah,
right?
And sometimes you'd be like, oh shit, right? Yeah. But like that's kind of like that's where like you just like barely dodged something or whatever when you're like maybe fighting a couple creatures. But it's not like you shouldn't be like sweating, just like throughout. So I feel like it's getting close. And and big thanks to our two testers. And the other kind of interesting thing that I want to point out is that we had originally planned on doing 2 play tests spread apart, where it'd be like 1 play test and it would take a few days to kind of address issues we saw and then do the next play test. And instead we decided, let's just do them both back to back, because then we get sort of it's a sampling question.
Yep.
If we get 2 people playing the game in the exact same state, then we get to see a wider
Better
diversity of
capture.
reactions to the kinds of things, because everybody has a different pace, and like people learn things in different ways, and people are coming in with different assumptions about what kind of a game this is or how it should work or whatever, right? And so I'm really glad that we did it that way, because we had such different we saw like such different approaches to how to
A lot of
navigate the
things.
world, or how to think about things or whatever. And in both cases, like it kind of allows us to see like, okay, well, like this person thought to do this in this way, and this other person still recognized the problem, but then went about it in this way that we didn't expect. Right. And so it's not necessarily that there's like a fundamental problem with what it is that we're doing. It's just that we didn't account for, this like alternative way of thinking about it. And now we can shore up that thing to make sure that we catch that and get the person, into a better place of understanding. But if you just do one person and you see them like fumble something or get stuck on something or whatever, it's very easy to overblow that and think like,
Oh no,
there's just a fundamental problem wrong with the root of this thing. But then if the next person doesn't, like, oh yeah, and they just get it immediately, right? Then like, okay, so maybe maybe it's fine sort of as it works, and we just need to do a
Make it
better
more
job of
precise
teaching
or-
it,
Right.
or
Slicking it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
That's that
so I definitely
reminder-
recommend that kind of approach, right?
Yeah, well, it's that reminder that any one player experience is not representative of player
It's totally
experiences,
unique.
right? Yeah, it's all unique. And when we talk about things like when you're because you're always designing for a particular like range of kinds of people, right? Because you can't make a game that is what everybody wants all of the time, right? That doesn't make any sense. So you kind of have an idea of the kinds of experiences that you're trying to generate and like what that should do to the person and how they would go about responding to your cues and clues, right? Like you do things in the game to try to get the player to go do something specific or that falls within a small subset of things. But there's no, like, you can't really just create that. Because there is no average experience, like where people just like on average do what you designed, right? And any one player is going to fall into certain things that are confusing to them, or not notice this versus that, or prefer some aspect of the game and therefore bias their actions towards that or whatever, right? So that you just end up with these very different experiences, and you can't assume that because one person did X, that means anything.
That's just what people do. Yeah. And so I'm actually giving a talk this weekend, which I will talk about in the next episode, because I will have given it at that point. But one of the things that I had to think a lot about in kind of articulating in this talk is the problem of information delivery, because like in a video game, you've made up a whole new reality, and a player coming into it has to learn the rules of this new world that they're inhabiting, including just basic stuff like how do I walk, like how do I talk to characters or whatever, right? And so as the player is sort of like learning those things, you as the designer have to anticipate the player's relationship to information in such a way that you can deliver it when they want it. Because
when they're receptive to it.
Yeah, because the problem is that your brain doesn't really respect all information as equally important, right? Some of it just kind of bounces right off because you're like, I don't know if I can know about whatever, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean,
this
it's
isn't
actually-
relevant to me.
It's
right?
the reason we get to exist is the fact that the sheer volume of information available to our brains, like their primary skill.
Their job is to bounce things off.
Yeah, is to pull just like the information dense patterns out of that and throw everything else away.
Yeah. And so what your job then is as a game designer is to prime the player to be receptive to information by putting them into a situation where they recognize that they have a problem and that the information you're about to give them is the solution to that problem.
Yeah, it's like every FPS, right, starts with like there's some sequence where you have to duck under something and then jump over something else and then like sprint jump over another thing, right? So that you just have to do it and they can deliver to you in those moments like here's the keys to press or whatever.
Yeah, because there's two ways. One is they could just like as soon as you boot up the game, they'd be like, here's the controls, big overlay.
Yeah.
Right. And then you just run around and then maybe you don't encounter anything that you have to crouch under until 2 hours in. And then at that point you're like, what was that button again? Right.
Or you don't even think about it. You're just like, I
guess I can't go there because you forgot. Right. And so, so what they do is they don't like tell you all the controls and they just put you in the world. They put you through a sequence where you just can't progress until you push that crouch button. But they won't just do it once. You know, they'll do it like 6 or 7 times throughout that opening sequence. And their job there is to just like make you receptive to when they tell you what the crouch button is, that you're like, oh yeah, I actually want that. I wanted to know that. Thank you.
But also it's exposing you to the patterns of what it means to need to use it, right? So it's not just a crouch, right?
Exactly.
It's you've now confronted various kinds of obstacles that reflect the kinds of things you're going to see in game that where crouching is the right move, right? So that it just reinforces the in-game world problem and also the solution at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So a big part of what we're trying to do then with this early stuff is essentially recognizing the places where we are failing to convey to the player what the problem is. Yeah. Because then of course we can't tell them how to solve it if they're like, this isn't a thing that I even care about. And like one of the things that happened with both of the playthroughs, and it happened in earlier playthroughs as well, we just haven't addressed it, is the problem of health. Of healing, which is that we have a health bar, just like in the original game. We have a little health bar in the top left corner that shows how much health you have. And if you die or whatever, you respawn with 1 HP, then of course like the next thing that you do that injures you is going to just kill you, right? And in both playthroughs, both of our testers spent well over an hour at 1 HP and never consumed a healing item, even though we had text out in the world that they walked past several dozen times, actually. It literally says, like, be sure to eat a healing item if your health is low, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, there's healing items on the ground next to it. So, like, as you walk past them, they, like, suck up and they go onto your hot bar and blah, blah, blah. But nobody ever pushed the button. And then in
because
both
they
cases,
didn't feel like they needed to heal, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, because and there's, like, 2 problems, right? One is that they weren't fighting things enough that they were really thinking about injuries as like a thing, right? So they weren't really primed in that way. And in addition, once you die the first time, your health bar is essentially empty, and so it almost becomes like an invisible rectangle. Yep. It's not a visible progress bar with like a color in it anymore. It's just kind of a nothing in the corner, and also the corner of the screen is where like nobody ever looks, right? And then the final thing is there's nothing that feels different in the game when you're on the verge of death versus when you're fully healthy. It's not like your character is like hobbling around, bleeding on things or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
and OG Crashlands, we just like have the screen gets constrained. There's an overlay, and like it kind of. I think we gray it out a bit too.
We do like a desaturate, and we kind of like pull up the reds and stuff like that. Yeah, and so it's basically like. We don't have that in Crashlands 2, but now, after watching playthroughs, we're like, okay, yeah, clearly we need one of those like edge of screen, low health, oh my God, things are bad kind of effects that kind of like pulses in, because that draws your attention to the fact that like something is wrong.
Well, right? Also telling about those experiences though too is that both people end up not using a healing item for like an hour or so. Once they realized that they were low health, both of them immediately used a healing.
They just started using it. Yeah.
It's been on the bar the whole time. They've seen the text a billion times, haven't touched it. It's like, and you're, as the designer, you're sitting there, you're like, is that getting through? Like, do they understand that there's a healing item? And then once they say, again, this is the whole idea of provide the problem first, allow people to identify that it is a problem, because sometimes it's not quite clear.
And then they'll solve
the solution. Yeah.
So it's basically so it's, and it's easy to look at this and be like, why won't these players figure this out? It's like, no, this is a design failure through and through, right? Like we hadn't done enough to make it apparent that, hey, you're very close to death. If anything goes wrong, you're in trouble. And because we hadn't done that design work to convey it, then they were not looking for a solution to this problem, because there is no problem as far as they're concerned, right? So those are the kinds of things that come out of these play tests that are just really interesting to see. Where like,
well, and there's another interpretation of these too, right? Which is just that at this point in the game's content and design, just health doesn't matter. Like even if you do see it. Right. And so that it might be that, in the general case, not even specifically about Crashlands, but like something like that, right? Where it seems like obvious that health is important to a game where you fight things, right? If it turns out when you play test it that like players don't even notice their health, they don't even notice that that's a thing, then it begs a question, just like, oh, like then what is that doing? Like, what is that doing for the game's design? Actually, is this something that just matters later? And so like, we'll basically
so we just haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, or is it something that actually something about how the game actually exists experientially makes it so that whole concept is like not the right one, right? We need to like rethink that concept. And that's the kind of fun stuff you get to actually see out of, especially with something as complicated as a video game. Because like Sam said, they're always saying like we're building an entire fake universe, right? So like there's so much going on, and the more like interesting and open worldy and whatever interactive everything is, the less you can guess about the consequences of how all of your design decisions come together.
I think it's also where having an idea of we were talking a lot about the emotional target of what you're trying to hit, right? How the player is supposed to feel in this world that you're making, whatever else. Being very clear and having that very well communicated across the board as you head into these play tests with the game that is not complete is super important, because on the one hand, you could say like, oh yeah, like clearly players don't care about their health. I guess, maybe this is, after the first hour or so, maybe this is like a not important concept, or we should change the nature of the game. But the other is to say, like, basically say that the initialization of the game is not around combat. Combat's a thing that opens up a little bit in, and it's supposed to change how the player relates to the world, because we want it to sort of be this layering on layering of ways in which you're adventuring, right? And if you don't have that clear thing in mind ahead of time, then you do also get hit by this sort of basically the randomness of play tests in terms of like what players stick onto, what they don't really pay attention to. And then all these questions pop up about like, is that actually important for a thing you haven't even paid any attention to? Really?
Because you have to still pay attention to the context, right? And so it's like in the context of the first 2 hours or whatever, it may very well be true that like, okay, health is just a pointless concept,
whatever.
Right? Yeah. But you can't just say that means it is pointless, right? You have to think the broader. I think it's the same as any data collection, right? When it comes to playtesting, it's like, get a survey of data, so not just one playtester, right? And then when you're interpreting the results, take into account the entire context of the results.
Context,
and don't push further than the bounds of the context in which you got the data.
Yeah. All right. Now, something big has happened that I will talk about.
Yeah. Let's go.
To kind of round out the episode, which is we've been talking a lot about AI on this podcast.
The AI wars.
In big part because I think we're all agreed that what is happening this year in AI, I think, is sort of it's a defining moment in tech in terms of like all this new stuff with like Midjourney and Chat GPT and all these AI tools. They're entering the mainstream consciousness as like, the tools that I use to do things should actually behave like a person and just let me talk to them, and they'll just do stuff like a person would, but way, way, way faster and with more accuracy and a much broader knowledge set and blah, blah, blah. A lot of tools are not, at that level, but people are starting to see just how close they're getting. And it's important. Mm-hmm. So a few weeks ago, Microsoft, I think it was 2.5 weeks ago, Microsoft announced their $10 billion investment in OpenAI, which is the creators of ChatGPT, in exchange for a 49% stake. So they don't have a controlling share, but
they have all the rest of it.
Pretty close. Yeah. So they're invested in the success of this platform. But importantly, I think part of that purchase was so that they could get access, frontline access to all these beta tools that OpenAI is working on. And this past week, Microsoft announced the new Bing. For those who don't know, Bing is Microsoft's search engine.
You could be forgiven if you didn't know that.
Yep. And I have to explain that because Bing has had a rocky history of just kind of not being used. It's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just that it's just not necessarily any better than Google.
Yeah, it doesn't have a value proposition to push you out of the Google search.
Yeah. And a lot of people use Chrome, and Chrome defaults to using Google's search engine. And, people's habit is, I'll just type stuff in the address bar and that will turn into a Google search. And, so basically Google has kind of over time just kind of not locked people into their ecosystem, but kind of coaxed people into a comfortable space using just Google's search and Chrome, et cetera. So Microsoft buys this share of OpenAI. And then Microsoft is like, we're gonna fuse this new Chat GPT stuff into Bing so that basically you would have sort of like a personal assistant that will use the stuff that normally you would be searching for on Bing and integrate it. So if you said like, oh man, I really want to plan a trip to, France next September. But now that I've made that decision, there's so much work to do.
So
and
many
all
pieces.
of it involves Googling, right? Involves going online and searching for like plane tickets.
as it
Binging. Yeah. I got to get plane tickets. I got to come up with an itinerary. I got to find hotels. I got to figure out which cities I should go to and what activities there are and plan it out day by day.
Got to make sure your passport's up to date.
Yeah, and the list just goes on and on and on, right? And so much of what makes that complicated and time consuming is that you yourself are responsible for compiling all this information, going to all these sites, putting it together, verifying everything, right?
Well, I even think about things like, so I need to get my driver's license replaced because it's expiring in a couple of weeks. And when I was like Googling how to do, I was like, okay, what do I need to do it, right? I have to like go through like 5 layers deep of some government website that I'm not 100% sure is a government website, to like find the list of things, but it's like under these conditions you need these, or these ones you need these. Well, and it's like it just keeps on going. And then I have a simple question, just like, how early can I get it relative to when it expires, right? And I just like can't find an answer. I just can't. I know it's out there somewhere, right? But I just can't get to it via a search engine. So if something was able to like know what actually I'm trying to get, right, and then
answer the
just
damn
fucking
question.
answer the question.
Yeah.
So I don't have to dig through websites for an hour.
And this is the thing that Microsoft, I think, sees, which is like search was revolutionary for its time because, of course, before we could search for things on the internet, you had kind of 2 options. If you didn't know something, your option was go to the library and kind of spend an afternoon sorting through books trying to figure out whether they have a book on the thing. And option 2 is just keep not knowing it.
Well, there was also a third option, which was just to make a claim that was too hard for anybody else to verify.
Just make shit up.
Or you just of course, if you call the DMV, probably that would do it too.
Oh yeah, in that case, if it was something that was
call people.
Answer,
And so now search basically kept all these things manual, right? Where like you still have to go like instead of going to the library and sorting through books, right? Now you're typing in a search and then you're just scrolling through all these different sites. Some of them are bullshit. Some of them are sponsored. Google also has their own like little compiled section where they're like, we've taken some snippets of some stuff and like maybe that's useful. And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But it's still up to you to kind of just keep like sifting through all these different things, right? But then what Bing is working on is they're like, we're going to sift. We've got a sifter. We got something that's going to look through all these sites for you and compile stuff. And because it's based off of ChatGPT, it's something that you can actually talk to, right? So if it's like, here's an itinerary for blah, and you could be like, I kind of want to. Yeah, let's do some more beach stuff. And like, I kind of want to take like the second day off, just like go to the spa or something like that, right? And then, it'll just do that. It'll just be like, yeah, here's the spa to go to that's close to your location. And then you can be like, that spa's too expensive. Find me another one, right? And be like, what about this one? Right? And like, it'll just do that stuff. And it's just it opens up access to all this information. Otherwise was just very labor intensive to kind of peruse, right?
Well, I think about it like, we talk a lot about the problems we've had in, say, like making the game of Crashlands 2. A lot of the problems are integration problems. What I mean by that is taking the different pieces of work or different pieces of information related to a thing and then getting them all properly lined up and put in the correct bucket so that you can actually have the thing at the end of the day. Whether that's a creature in a video game how does it move? How does it look? How do the animations work? Etc. Or if it's saying, hey, I want to plan a trip to France in this case, there's a bajillion sort of facts about that you have to integrate together, right? And so search allows you to basically solve the first part of the problem, which is saying, how do I even think about this? Where's the information related to flights, to which beach to go to whatever? But it still relies completely on you to integrate all the information yourself. Right?
You have to know what questions to even ask up front.
Yes.
And it's only going to tell you exactly what you search for.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like, here's some stuff you didn't think about, right? Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this then is I think, because, Microsoft got kind of booted out of the mobile war, back in the
Windows Phone didn't go
Windows
well.
Phone died. I had a friend who was very into it. He might still be a developer over there.
We
Yeah,
got
right,
one.
right.
We got a Windows Phone dev kit back when we were.
They were cool.
Like,
They were very
Colossus
fun.
Rampage.
But it just didn't, they were too slow on the uptake there. And then, no one's been able to challenge Google's search stuff. I mean, Microsoft, of all people, who has the biggest war chest just sort of in the world, couldn't do anything with Bing because it wasn't meaningfully different. It wasn't providing additional value. And so I think it's fascinating about this to me is like, clearly, Microsoft seeing the opportunity and saying, oh, there's basically a different way to look at the search problem, which is not not just as a search problem, but as an actual integrated answers problem for you and your context.
I would say they're converting search into like research, right? Where like now you can ask a fairly open question that even has like layered sort of intent and nuance to it, and it'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
It needs a new approach. But I think the other thing that's also true is like it's not just a new approach in like how to search, but it has to be a new business goal, right?
Yes.
Because historically, like the idea for a search engine was just, well, people won't pay for things on the internet, so you can't just like sell access to the search engine. So that was like very early thrown out the window as a path, right? And so then the next one is, well, we also like, and actually like in the earlier days, in the Yahoo days, you would actually pay to have your website on the top of like Yahoo's lists and stuff, right? So like that was part of how they made money. And in that model of just like, oh, you just pay to have your stuff shown to people, right, is basically what we settled on, because it's the one where the person who has the biggest interest in showing up at the top is then forking over cash, right? But you end up with this very weird incentive in terms of the design for the person making the search engine in that scenario, which is they need to have the search results be relevant enough that people continue using the search engine, right? So they can't give you too many results, and those results need to be like what you were looking for,
Pretty
right?
good. Yeah.
But also, if they get you right where you want to go, then they can't divert your attention to ads and get you to go generate ad revenue for them, right? So they have to find some kind of a balance where they can't actually give you exactly what you want. They just have to get close enough that they can keep selling ads, right? And so with a model where you actually synthesize the information, that's basically you saying like, okay, well, we're not going to send you to websites anymore. We're not actually going to force you to rove your eyes over a screen that's covered in ads, right? There's going to be a spot you can look that just summarizes this info, right? And what that means is that using that as a mechanism to like sell ads, right?
It's a little weird.
Goes way down because you're not relying on people's eyes, just like,
Well, it has several knock-on problems because there's that, but there's also the problem of web traffic. If you are one of these let's say you're a travel site and you've got several posts about like stuff to do in France, right? Back from our example. Well, in the past, somebody would literally go to your site and read that stuff and then be like, nice. And then they would put that into their itinerary.
Or famously a recipe post, right?
Recipe that always starts off with, this started back in the Cold War when my grandpappy
because they're
lost his toe.
Yeah, they're selling ads, right? That's what all that stuff is there for.
So what does it mean when people don't go into your website ever again? What does it mean?
It means weirdly, it's hard to figure out who would even be advertising on a search engine if people don't go to websites anymore anyways, right? And then also who would be making websites if they literally can't make money off of the websites, right? So the problem is like this, integrating ChatGPT into a search engine is such an incredible like tool for the user of the search engine.
Potentially, anyway, we have to see how it shakes out.
The potential is crazy, but on the flip side, I don't understand
the economics of the people
for anybody else.
The economics of the people who make the content.
But I think we've been seeing this over and over and over again, right? Because like if you go back to the early days of the internet, that was with like the very naive is the wrong word because it's a more positive thing, right? But people who are just like, oh yes, like information can be free now, right? So it's like if you want to share this thing that I mean, it was originally for like researchers and stuff, right? It's like if you want to share what you know, you can just put it up there, right? And I remember like in the earlier days, that's what it felt like. It felt like the internet was full of like all the information about the world, right? And it wasn't originally like the idea. It wasn't developed to make money. That wasn't the purpose of the internet, right? It was to make information exchange easier. But then, of course, like, capitalism, right? Everyone's trying to make money happen somehow, trying to pull it out of some system, right? And so then you see people if you're trying to figure out, like, how do we monetize this, right? Because it's a public good. It's like trying to monetize the road, right? It's like, how do we turn this thing into money for ourselves, right? And so, because it costs something to make content, but again, like, that's not why the internet's there. So people came up with, they just basically invented their own problem, which was, oh, hey, this cool thing exists. So like money could be made there somehow, I guess, right? So like they just invented a problem that didn't even exist, which was it's really hard to make money on a free platform of exchange, right? And so the only way to do it on a platform designed for just exchange, right, is to advertise, is to put things in front of people. That's the only way to do it, right? And that has never been very successful because like the advertising revenue is always dropping year over year, right?
Well, it's a volume game. You're always competing for attention, which is why, like, now if you ever go to any website on your phone,
oh my god, dude,
you get you get a sentence and then you scroll past several full screen ads.
Because the thing is, it's like because advertisements like in your face are so counter to a good user experience, right? That this push and pull between being able to make money via a bad user experience that you generate and creating a user experience outside of the ads worth suffering through the ads for, right? Like that war has been what the internet has been about since.
But let me ask you this.
I was going to say that what you probably see though, because the reality is like if you can do this sort of thing with ChatGPT-4 with sort of basically linking of the actual websites used to generate the kind of, say, this itinerary to France idea. It's not the case that they wouldn't be able to figure out how to do some kind of like sponsored. It's like an Instagram post at that point, right? The AI is essentially providing like a sponsored link to something else, or like, oh, also, like there might be a little ad slug or something, and then it's like, you may also want to check out this spa, and it's like rated 5.
There's a new opportunity for that. And honestly, like if that's how advertising worked, which is I had a real problem that I expressed, and then an advertisement was like, hey, we have a solution to that problem.
That's like the whole idea of like marketing being a force for good or advertising a force for good. It's like actually identifying someone with a problem who doesn't know that there is a solution, or that a particular solution exists that they could just easily, like there is supposed to be a good amount of like good in that whole
but the reality
exchange.
of how advertising works is that since it has to be to some extent untargeted, right, then that could never be true unless it's a just-in-time delivery of that information. Like when you're looking for that info, that's when you get it. Right.
So my question is, when is the sponsored piece of this Bing search going to show up in terms of like just this sort of
I think very soon. Ads? Yeah. So I think two things. One is that the new Bing with ChatGPT, they have footnotes basically where like it'll say, try checking out like this spa or whatever, and there'll be a little like number next to it, and you can mouse over it and see like the link to the site that it's talking about, right? So then like at the bottom of its response, you actually get a list of websites that it used to compile the thing, right? So my assumption is that they'll just basically add some kind of like a different color or different way of indicating like this is a sponsored recommendation in this itinerary or whatever, and then you could potentially say like, but that's also the sponsored things, or
it's like such a hard game to play, right? Because when you just show almost contextless advertisements, like even on a search engine where like they have some relationship to the thing that you search for, right? But it's just an ad, like it's just an ad, and it's like, hey, this, that there's like a decoupled relationship, right? The moment you start getting like a synopsis, a tight summary of like an actual answer to the thing that you're trying to do, right? And it includes that entity that built it having to decide, do I replace this part of the answer with this sponsored variant of it, right? That means that it has to understand that those truly are like drop-in replacements and like fun, then go out and find the things that can be plopped in there, right? And also has to maintain a high enough amount of confidence in the user that they'll actually grow to trust this. Because if they don't trust the system, they just won't use those links. That's just all. That's what'll happen, right? And so you still even though like this provides a new vessel for like advertising that could be very cool for all parties, right? It's a way more difficult one to pull off, right? Because Google already can barely handle. Just there's articles out every week about how some new malware website managed to get all the way to the top of the Google ads right before Google realized what it was and pulled it. And they're getting better and better at that, actually. And so all of those things bring down trust in that system so fast. And I think as soon as you're looking at a summary that claims to be factually correct, it's like the moment you find a reason not to trust
it has to be.
It actually has to be. And so that I think that challenge, because that's the challenge we live in the world today, which is like almost everything you see is bullshit, either like to an extreme degree or at least a little bit, right? Almost everything, because every incentive is aligned for bullshit generation, right? Across every dimension. So that's already the world we live in, and trying to figure out how to pull out like the useful stuff out of that is like, that's the problem of the day. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's also like, like AI is so interesting because it's poised in that position of it's both the cause of this, but also the possible solution to it. Right. But the thing that still makes it really challenging is still that same thing, which is how do you tell the bullshit from the non-bullshit? And that's the thing I'm really the most curious about with this, like being integration, right? Is that Chat GPT has not solved this problem, and there's no way for it to solve this problem. Right. Yeah. And so is Bing going to be doing something on top of that, to like,
are they going to somehow curate things in a way that verifies
like what
accuracy?
Is that? Yeah, because if you think about like what Google has done with, and maybe Bing has done the same thing, I don't know, but like what Google has done with Google search page is that if you search for certain kinds of things, it spawns up these kinds of custom like widgets, but it's for certain categories that are really well defined, right? So it's like if you ask questions that seem to implicate local businesses, Google Maps pops up and it shows you on the map where the businesses are, right? Or if you're looking at flights, a little flight widget pops up and it's like, am I delayed? So it has these useful features, but they're very curated and very small, right? And like in just how much surface area they have. And that's
they're all kind of
bespoke.
Doable. Like they're made to answer a very specific question.
Yeah, for kinds of problems. Right.
They have like a breakdown of sports scores for a specific game, or like you said, flight information.
But that allows them to curate stuff accurately. Yeah, and so that's what I wonder with like a Chat GPT integration or something, right? Because like a lot of what people are selling with AI is actually just like some more off the shelf thing like Chat GPT or something, right? And what they're selling is like a particular route into it, right? So like a lot of AI services actually just have like a prefix question that's going to get fed into GPT, right? Yeah. And then they have you provide, like as far as you can tell, like they're just doing their own full magic, but really what they've done is just tailored your requests to GPT, right?
Yeah, you can see this. There's a website called brancher.ai where you can basically do that, and you can see as soon as you use it a little bit, you'll understand like how a lot of these quote unquote like AI services are actually working, which is that they're typically just prepending. They're basically creating a prompt that then sort of wraps into almost like a form answer that you give in a way that then allows them to generate what appears to be like a very custom response. Like I made just like a really dumb Pokédex generator where you feed in an animal and a type, and then it generates like a new Pokemon Pokédex thing for it.
Right.
And even going through that, like you could basically, all it does is it sends stuff off to ChatGPT in a particular format and then gets that information back. It's really easy to understand then like how these are actually working and where it's almost like the pipes, right? Where like the internet protocol stuff was like the initialization of being able to do frankly all the stuff on the internet, right? Like just being able to swap information and everything else. That by itself is already, it's kind of magical, but like it doesn't in particular leverage, like it's just sort of the infrastructure underneath then what becomes this next layer of sort of magic on top. And I think something like ChatGPT, that's essentially what that is. When it's weird that regular people can interact with it raw, which is just so odd, I think, from a technology perspective. Usually those infrastructural things are not in any way like a thing that a public person rando could just go poke, without any training. But this is one of those ones that like everyone can kind of get their hands on it in a way that is very odd. And then I think look at that brancher.ai, I think lets you see how, like Adam was talking about, a lot of these new tools are just leveraging ChatGPT, right? Completely. They don't have their own AI models or anything like that going on.
And there's also, but the other like aspect of that is there's no such thing as just like a fully generalized AI, right? That because even ChatGPT, it's designed to be an entity you have a conversation with, right? That's its design structure, and like because it's it's a more general underlying system than that, then you can like make that conversation be basically you making a demand for it to create something, right?
Right.
And then that's what it spits out. But it's still designed to be this like a chat-based kind of an interaction.
It's a language model.
Yeah. And so if you take, so like the idea of like, oh, let's just like plug this into search, right? Just doesn't make sense because it's like one general thing focused on chat and then just saying like, okay, now people do a search, they get a bunch of search results. Like, so let's just like plug this in. And now like we have this really great tool that summarizes things, right? Mm-hmm. So, cause like to get something like this itinerary generator, right? You would have to have an additional layer of a model that like can generate itineraries, right? And presumably that is able to differentiate between like kinds of information so that it can be more of a template-y kind of a behavior, to at least to an extent, right? So that,
but that's where you get these services basically built on top.
Yeah.
So like
so it's being going to be this basically, it's like where they're over time, kind of like what Google did, right? They just keep on adding these like somewhat tailored experiences where when you put a search in, they try to detect which kind of an experience that implies, right? But they get to use then the power of taking human hands off of it then and letting something that can process shit really fast, right? Go convert all of that stuff into better summarized content.
That's fast.
Yeah. Like what is it going to look like?
And I mean, we're not even halfway through February, right? And like ChatGPT first popped up in like the end of November. It had 100 million users in 2 months, $10 billion purchased by Microsoft. 2.5 weeks later, it's integrated into Bing, right? And then like the last thing that Microsoft is doing, which I'll just hit on real quick, is there's a wait list to use this feature, to use ChatGPT Bing integration. And to jump up the wait list, you need a Microsoft account, you need to install the Bing app on your smartphone, and you need to have Bing be your default search engine in your browser, right? So they're basically like, if you want to use this thing, you got to slip into our ecosystem, right?
Very smart.
And I got to wonder, like, because I've been reading all kinds of articles this week about Google essentially just shitting their pants about how fast this is moving and that they just were not prepared, because they've been doing all kinds of AI work, but I think they're being overly cautious about it to the point where they're like, we're just not going to push on this, right? And of course, OpenAI comes out and they're like, we're not being cautious. We're just going to fucking do it. And now things are just happening very quickly. And I think it's going to be such a volatile situation over the next couple of months of what shakes out of this, because it's moving. It's moving very fast. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. And again, we don't know when Sam is going to be missing in the near future. Anytime. So definitely, and we've been kind of going light on questions these past several episodes. We're kind of letting the questions pile up so that we have, some stuff to just kind of bloviate about while Sam is gone. So definitely ask some questions over at podcast.bscotch.net so we can kind of get that stockpile up for those episodes. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.